It's the Deadline Junkies Podcast with your hosts, Jordan Imiola, Kerstin Porter, and Shami.
Today we have two guests, Kaz and Ryan Firpo. They wrote the newly released Marvel film Eternals, which hit theaters on November 5th. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, Jordan. It's a pleasure to be here. Really excited to talk to you guys.
So our first question for you is, how and when did you two start writing together?
So we are cousins. So I've known Kaz since he was born, and he's known me since I've been a little bit older than that. And so we always had kind of this unofficial collaboration growing up where I would write stories and share them with him, and he would write stories, share them with me. And then at some point, we even made like little films together, basically like Lego stop animation and other little things that we did with DV cameras and iMovie. And then we kind of both, when we started working professionally, we went different routes. I stayed on the West Coast, and Kaz, he went to NYU on the East Coast and started working in commercials shortly after that. And I kind of went more of sort of like an independent film route. I was making like these independently produced documentaries, and he was doing his commercials. And after so long of this, we both were feeling kind of burnt out, and we're kind of feeling like it's not like we're not getting closer to our goal of making our own movies, our own scripted movies. And so that's when Kaz kind of called me up and said, hey, we've always had this unofficial collaboration. Like, let's collaborate officially on something, and let's write a movie together that we can go and make, and you could raise some money and I could raise some money, and we can just do something for like $1 million. We wrote this script called Ruin, which was our first official collaboration. And we had plans to go make it. And then through a series of happenstance, it ended up in the hands of Sam Warren, who is a manager at LBI and who became our manager. And he signed us based off that script. And then he basically shotgun blasted that along with his partner, Harry Langsfield. And we had basically like 75 meetings in like 5 weeks. And that script ended up getting optioned. And that would like launched our Hollywood career basically. But had we gone the path of making it, I think we probably could have raised $1 million. Because at the time I had just made an independently produced documentary, a feature-length documentary about online poker that was financed entirely from these online poker kids, like a bunch of guys who were like, super young and just had made millions of dollars for online poker and just didn't know what to do with their money. So they were very free in putting together a budget for me to make that feature. And so we had the idea that we could go back to them again and try to do something with them, along with some of Kaz's connections that he had made through commercials. And so that was our plan. And it just got derailed by this whole Hollywood adventure that we're on now.
Let me jump in here for some like strong context. Like I grew up on a dirt road in the country and chopped firewood for warmth. And we didn't have like an uncle we could call for Hollywood. We didn't have agents. We didn't have managers. I went to NYU Film School. I shot weddings and bar mitzvahs to put myself through college and worked 3 jobs at NYU. And so, no, it wasn't a matter of like, yes, I will call my wealthy uncle and we'll make a movie. It was a matter of, we wrote a script and we said to ourselves, no one's going to give us $100 million to make that epic that I have sitting on the shelf, those 5 scripts I wrote before I got here. But I knew that, look, I'd been making commercials professionally for years. And you want to talk about frustrated producers, there's a long laundry list of people who end up there. But more importantly, it really came down to, look, there's a lot of ways to make a movie. I'm a French citizen. We qualify for the EU grant. And the dream was really like, let's make something that's small enough that we have control, that we don't have to wait for other people to say, yes, you have permission to make your film now. I've read it, here's your permission. It was really like, if you can cobble together enough, Ruin is a script, just by way of context, it takes place with 2 actors in the woods. Like the majority of the film is just 2 people standing around and talking about this stuff. And that was the jump. But we married it to a genre, to a time period and a place in time that brought a lot of historical context to it. So that was really our journey for us. It was starting by, and I tell this to film students and in meetings all the time, just anyone who wants to make movies, it's like, write something that you love and are really passionate about. Don't write something that you think other people will love. Not only is it very transparent, there's just something that's missing when you try to tell stories for somebody else. I think that's true on the biggest levels when you're doing a $200 million movie like Eternals, and it's true when you're writing a $200,000 movie like Ruin, and we wrote that script because we believed we could make it. And I think that's a really important thing, is that you have a different, state of mind when you're writing a movie for yourself.
Yeah, that's awesome. So where you were growing up, that's the Bay Area, right? Did both of you grow up in the Bay Area?
Yeah, we lived within like 40 minutes of each other in the Bay. Kaz was in like West Marin, kind of living in this little cabin in the woods, basically. And then I grew up in Benicia, which is in the East Bay, which is kind of like this funky little kind of suburb with a strong artistic community.
And how did those areas inspire you, and especially to get into film? Because I know that's not a film heavy area. So how do you get, inspired to make these films without people around you making films?
I mean, it's not LA, but there is a film scene in the Bay Area. But it's a lot of people just really trying to raise like, 10 grand to make their feature that they wrote like 20 years ago. So it's not a very like commercialized or active film scene, but there are people who had made movies or were trying to make movies. So we were kind of aware of film. It's not like we just grew up in the middle of Alaska or something like that. But actually, like Kaz's parents, his mom was a sound mixer who actually worked on a lot of film productions in the Bay Area. So she was actually one of the first female sound mixers, I think, to be in the union, if I'm not mistaken. And so we kind of knew a little bit about the scene through her and through his dad a little bit. But really the inspiration to like get into movies just came from a love of movies and a love of storytelling. I think we were both like pretty heavy readers when we were younger. Kaz still is today. I'm kind of like, I've kind of tapered off and I don't have time to read anymore. But anyway, we just loved telling stories, and film was a really cool opportunity to tell a story, but then you're using a lot of tools beyond the written word, and you're having to make something, realize something in real life, which becomes its own fun, creative challenge. And it becomes a social activity. Like that was another big part too, is like making movies with our friends when we were younger. And that was like the most fun that we'd ever had. And so really, I think like even moving forward, becoming professional, it's always been about kind of trying to recapture that feeling of just being in the backyard, making a movie with your friends on the family TV camera.
Nice. And circling back to Eternals, what was your relationship with Marvel before you got involved? Were you big comic book fans?
I personally wasn't, to be perfectly honest. And I would just add to that last part, San Francisco actually had a huge film boom, especially in like when we were growing up. This is not to defend San Francisco. I actually think San Francisco has changed a lot. But when we were growing up, I was literally in elementary school. They were shooting like Nash Bridges, car scenes, like chase scenes outside my elementary school, like every day. I'd like walk to school and they'd be like, the street would be closed off, and then like The Rock would be shooting, and they'd be shooting like Michael Bay chase scenes on the streets. And that time period was really exciting for San Francisco. I mean, there was like Godzilla. It was just like nonstop. And it was just something that, like, because San Francisco is such a small city, like New York, they're shooting, like, I went to school in New York for 10 years, or I lived in New York for 10 years. I went to school out there, and there might be 24 productions in New York City on a given day, and you won't see it because it's so massive, But in San Francisco, it's like, oh my God, they're shooting down at Fisherman's Wharf. Like, you'd run down and watch them crash the cars together. And so that definitely gave you proof positive of what is possible with movie magic. But I think far more importantly, we really lived through this golden age of home movies. I think now everyone has a supercomputer in their pocket that can shoot, write, edit, direct, VFX, color grade a whole movie in your pocket. Like literally an iPhone could do that. And Soderbergh's proving it every day. But we lived through this era with like mini DVs, where you could literally record for like $150 on this camera and then like capture it through a FireWire cable into your mom's laptop, and like you could make a movie, and it was a really exciting time. And if you want to be honest with like how we got into storytelling, it was just making movies with our friends in the backyard. I think anyone who's listening to this, there's a lot of different ways you get into cinema, and it's funny to me because in some places it's like, well, you just loved movies so much, you started reading about them and writing about them, and you didn't have that like ragtag group of misfit friends to go shoot them in your backyard with, or you just took your borrowed camera and you said, okay, you're the thief and you're the hero and you're the robber, and now like in action, and I made dozens of movies. And it was just such a great experience just watching an audience go like laugh and smile and cheer at the stuff that you were doing. And that's such an addictive feeling. And it's something we're chasing all our lives, even on the big screen. I was there opening weekend with Eternals, in a baseball cap, sitting in the back right corner of the Chinese theater on opening night. And it was like sold out, front row, half the audience is dressed up. And, I don't think anything's better than that. Because a lot of these ideas, there's so much of Eternals, so much of us in that film. So as far as it goes to comics, to answer your real question, Jordan, I wasn't a huge comic book reader. They were a magical art form. I have a lot of love for that art form, but for me, it was like action figures and fantasy books. And I think that that's what I would always tell people. It's like, if you want to tell great stories, you don't need to just watch movies. You need to live an interesting life. You need to chase the things that you love and go work in archaeological digs in Egypt for 4 months and study, ballet and watch operas and just chase art, because I think if you only watch movies, you'll tell stories that are just movies. And I don't know if that's as interesting as telling stories about life. So we have a lot of love for everything that, Jim Kruger and Alex Ross, who did Earth X, which is one of the big runs that we were inspired by for Eternals. But I think it's an art form that, like many things, there's a lot of ways into it.
Yeah, your passion is so palpable. I love it. Could you walk us through the process of how you got involved with making Eternals?
Yeah, so we wrote the script Ruin that got us meetings with everybody all over town, and we did like these like 80 meetings in like 5 weeks or whatever it was, and so one of those meetings was just a general meeting with Nate Moore, who at the time was just I think he just started or was just about to start filming Black Panther, and we basically, and so they hadn't started filming Infinity War yet, and Endgame, but they knew like where it was going to go, and they obviously knew that Phase 3 was ending and that they were going to have to think about what they're going to do for Phase 4. So we ended up having a conversation all about what Phase 4 could be, and it was just one of those really good meetings where everybody just kind of clicked, and we were all just kind of like feeding each other ideas, and it was just a combination, a chemistry where we all made each other better basically in the room, even though we weren't talking about any like hard pitches or hard storylines about where it could go. Just the general feeling was very fluid and fertile for the imagination. And so it was a really good meeting. And obviously anytime you meet with Marvel, like that's really exciting. So we kind of wondered what would come of that, but then, months, weeks go by and you don't hear anything and you just sort of like forget about it and kind of go on with your life. And then that year, at the end of the year, we ended up winning the Blacklist with Ruin. And we also sold this spec script to Netflix called Mimi from Rio that same week. So we just had this like crazy year where everything just clicked and everything went right. And then going into the following year, which was 2018, excuse me, early in the year, we got a call from Nate basically and said, hey, I have this kind of crazy idea that I'd love to pitch you guys. And so we came in to meet him for only the second time, and it was Eternals.
That's
Right.
awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, Eternals has been out for a little while now, and how exciting is it for you guys to see it? I mean, you kind of already touched on this. How exciting is it to see a Marvel movie with your name out there and to see it on the big screen?
Yeah, I think it's like it goes in stages, or in waves, like at first you can't really comprehend what it's going to be like, the experience of releasing a movie on this kind of scale and having this many people see it. So I just kind of went in with like a blank mind being like, well, we're just going to see what happens here. And then as it kind of settles in and you go to the premiere and then you go to like these general screenings with the general audience and you start to see it impacting all these people and you read the stuff online, then yeah, it was incredibly exciting. And we came from more like an independent film background, especially me. I really thought that I would only ever be an independent filmmaker and didn't even know if I would ever work in Hollywood or for studios and whatnot. So I never imagined that this many people would ever see one thing that I had any part in creating. And I think like just in terms of the waves, the thing that's starting to settle in now is just like realizing like that this movie is part of like a legacy and is part of a film like lexicon, and the same way that Star Wars was for me when I was a kid, now this is going to be like that for other people. Because that's been the really exciting thing too, is like I have some friends who have kids, who are like teenagers or preteens, and they have just been like loving this movie. And so I'm kind of realizing, oh yeah, like that, them seeing this is like, for me, like when I was seeing Star Wars for the first time, or when I saw The Matrix, for example, like this is that milestone for them, and that's a really incredible feeling, and something that I really, quite frankly, never thought that I would be part of. So, thank you, Marvel.
Yeah, and what I would just say is that for me, I went to art school. I maybe shared the Scorsese view of Marvel for a long time. And when I started to sit down and like watch them, I really, really did sit down right before we pitched Kevin. We watched about like 17 Marvel movies back to back in a row to like really, just surround ourselves and submerge ourselves in the universe. And I've just found so much to love. But more importantly, I studied classics in college, and one of the things that I really loved is just that revelation that this is, for so many people, just a continuation of those stories we've been telling for 2,000 years about gods that are fallible, making mistakes with superpowers, shooting lightning out of their hands. I mean, it's the same old stories that the Greeks were telling. And the difference is that today, I think that they've taken on this role in society as kind of like a shared monomyth. They're a way for a whole generation to sort of have a shared mythology that we keep track of, that represents good, that represents evil. And I think they've really become a lot more than anyone could have ever expected. And it's not because, yeah, sure, there's millions and millions of dollars being pumped into print and advertising to make us see this everywhere and to love it. But I also think because they hold this special place in the human story that people really care about seeing. It's easier to be human when the gods are fallible. I think that's something that I feel pretty strongly about. So especially with Eternals, to tackle that head on, I mean, we're incredibly proud of the movie. I think it's one of the biggest, craziest, weirdest movies ever made in Hollywood, and sort of the chance to make the most of anything is an honor, and certainly to make a very strange movie in such a big machine. It's a movie that I think is going to have a long life. I think people are going to remember it. So it's for sure, when you set out to tell stories, it is nice when people watch them.
Chloe Zhao did an amazing job directing this. What was it like working with her? Did you meet with her all the time? Was it like once a month? What was the process?
So Chloe, yeah, so we came on Eternals basically first, and so we wrote a couple of drafts before Chloe came on, and so when Nate told us it was going to be Chloe, we were just incredibly excited because we had seen the writer and we just loved that movie and knew that she was a very special filmmaker. And then so when we finally met, there was just like so much synergy between our visions for the movie and even our pitch materials. We got to share kind of notes about winning the job, and there was just like so many things that overlapped in her pitch with our pitch. So that was really exciting. And I would say too that like I didn't really know Chloe as a person. I only knew her work, and I was really like pleasantly surprised by how kind of like just relaxed and casual and funny she is. I remember a lot of the meetings that we had, we would have these like story sessions that would go on for like 4 or 5 hours. And at the end of every one, my sides were hurting because we were just all like telling so many jokes and like giving each other shit and just having like such a good time. Yeah, so we did these couple drafts, and then Chloe came on, and then we did a couple of drafts with her as a director. But at the time, she was also directing Nomadland, and she started shooting, I think, shortly after she came on the movie. So we would only see her like sporadically, would see her like once a month, and then we would have like a really, really long session where we would just go over all these notes and discuss a bunch of ideas. And then she would go back out to South Dakota or wherever she was at the time and just keep filming. So yeah, it was really it was a great balance. I think she brought out a lot of stuff to the project that just kind of helped amplify all the themes and ideas that we were already interested in exploring.
My next question for you is, were there any challenges you faced creating a new set of characters in an already existing universe?
I think any story you tell, you're trying to fit into a box of what people think it's going to be, what they hope it might be. I always use the metaphor when we talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, pretty simply. is that there's no like great master whiteboard in Kevin's office where he's keeping track of every little thing, and I think that's his genius, that there isn't an algorithm that makes Marvel special. It's that they hire talented people and they support them, and I think that's the people that really makes all Marvel special. Victoria Alonso, Kevin Feige, and more, all the whole parliament of writers, producers, people that work there, they love what they do. So when you're working with Marvel, it's really a conversation of like, here's the cup. This is the cinematic universe. As long as you can do whatever you want, as long as you don't, destroy the sanctity of what is already there. You can't go, okay, Cap's actually just, a bunch of bees in a human suit, and like that's now canon. It's like you accept what is and you build on that. And I think that's what's so fun. It's like kids in a playground, when you're saying, okay, I'm building a sand castle, and you're like, ooh, I'm going to put a tower here. And you're like, yeah, go build a sick tower over there. Like, that's dope. That's Eternals, and that's really the process, is you're adding and you're playing jazz with each other's creations. And so, Eternals, maybe I would say we were lucky. A lot of people don't have preconceived notions of who they are, what they're supposed to be. And so for us, it really became a vessel and a vehicle to have these conversations about purpose and love and loyalty, about gods and belief and faith. In a Marvel movie, in a movie about like laser beams being shot out of your eyes and dudes flying around fighting monsters. It's really a movie about missionaries, coming to Earth and questioning their purpose and questioning their faith. And so for sure, it's really exciting to do something different like that.
I love that analogy, the being jazz musician, basically, with what you're given, and then you guys get to play around with it. So Eternals has the fairly popular theme of the good of humanity versus the bad of humanity. And is that something you are naturally drawn towards, or is this something new for you?
That's something that we're very interested in exploring, that we explore constantly in our work. And I think especially too in like the last kind of 4 years, with what we've sort of been going through as a world and as a species, that's become a very big question that's at the forefront of many people's minds. I think like the one thing that I'm at least I'm very interested in exploring constantly is just the idea, like, are we risen apes or fallen angels? Like what is truly human nature? Because we did kind of come out of the primordial ooze and rise by using these as hunter-gatherers, basically, as essentially using these aggressive aspects of our personality to basically dominate other tribes or nature itself. And that has brought us a long way, but I think what we're finding is that we can't continue to live like that, like that's not a sustainable lifestyle. And that's not something that's good for the whole of humanity. Maybe good for some individuals, but it's not good for everybody. And so those are things that are being challenged by just the events of the world. And so then naturally they're going to start to influence and impact our storytelling. So that's something that was incredibly important to explore in Eternal. It's just the idea of exploring humanity from its very origins up to where we are now, and trying to determine how do we get here, and where are we going to go from here.
I make this joke, and you guys are screenwriters, so you'll appreciate this, I think, more than anyone. Being a screenwriter in 2021 is like the closest I think you can be to a philosopher as a paid job. You're literally sitting around thinking about stuff. Your job is a computer. If you're talking to me or listening to this, you have the same tools we do. And a lot of it is in your mind. You're solving big puzzles imaginarily in your head. How do these celestial gods line up with this desire and this character's want means this character's need? And so, I don't say it as like a self-aggrandizement. I say it as like, I genuinely believe your job as a screenwriter or as a filmmaker is to like think deeply about the human experience, experiment and experience, and reflect that in your stories and question it and challenge it, and to make somebody, even if they enjoy your movie and laugh and have a good time, maybe they cry a little bit, but by at some point in that process, they're going to go, are we all good all the time? Am I making these right choices? And to ask big questions. And if you can't do it in a movie with space gods, I don't know when you can,
My next question is, you guys have an amazing cast in here, stellar cast. Did you know already going into the script who was going to be cast, or did you like have the cast that you're like, someone has to be this character? Like, were you inspired by anyone, or was it cast already after the script?
Yeah, I mean, that was the really cool process of working. The cool aspect of working with Marvel is that, I've always tried to picture a cast in my mind while I'm writing. Like, it just really helps me see the movie more, because really, like, to me, like, I was an editor for many, many years, and so that's really where I learned storytelling. And when you're editing, there's so often, like, you get into a spot where you're like, oh man, if I just had this little piece of movie or something, or I wish they would have said this instead. But you can't do anything about it when you're an editor. But when you're a writer, you can. You're making a movie inside your head. So to me, I'm just really making a movie inside my head, and then just simply describing what I see, on the page. And so it really helps me to see actors, and it helps to capture their voice, and sometimes it is like actors that are that we can cast, and sometimes I'm just like, it's got to be Gene Hackman from the French Connection. That's what I'm picturing, and that's just the way that helps me see it. So anyway, but before writing scripts, you picture these actors and you don't know, like, how am I going to ever, when you have no agent, no ins in Hollywood, how am I going to ever get to them? With Marvel, it was like we would see an actor in our heads, we would make our case, and then it's like 2 weeks later, they're like, oh yeah, Salma's in the movie now. Like, they had the power to basically make all these things happen. And so it was just really exciting, especially when Chloe came on, to start to see all these people just kind of like coming in one after another. The movie just kept getting more and more special with every casting choice.
Can you visualize me apart?
Absolutely.
So you guys mentioned Ruin, your script that topped the blacklist, and how it opened so many doors for you. Do you have any specific tips for young writers on how to use or navigate the blacklist or script competitions and such?
Yeah, I mean, the blacklist is not a thing that you can like call and apply online for, as much as I wish that it were, but I think that would just be a long laundry list. As far as I know, the blacklist is just something that sort of happens when you write something great. And I mean, that's like non-facetiously. I think I stand pretty strongly by that. You should just write something that's different, and more importantly, write something that's yours. I think the best advice that anyone can have is like fail early and often, write a bunch of bad scripts before you write the good ones. And then write something that you really believe in. It's really special and distinct. I think that's really important. Voice. I didn't read a tremendous amount of scripts before I kind of came to this town, because I saw myself more as a filmmaker. But I think, as Kurosawa would say, screenwriting is filmmaking. And so, as far as navigating that stuff, apply to the stuff you believe you can win. Don't spend your money on things that are just for the long shot. I will say the thing that really changed my life, not in a tangible way, but more in a spiritual way, was the Academy Nichols Screenwriting Fellowship. That was something that it's not tremendously expensive to apply to. I would argue, maybe someone's going to fight me on this, I would argue it's probably like the one screenwriting competition that anyone can enter that like matters. Like, if you win that, it'll change your life, for sure. And you could just write a great script and submit it. And so in college, like right when I graduated, I wrote a series of scripts with my roommate at the time. We just like lived in this cave and just like wrote movies, which is amazing. It's an amazing way to work. And we wrote 3 movies in like 9 months. And one of those that we wrote, we submitted 2 scripts. I submitted one, he submitted the other, because we didn't want to pay the whole fee. We split it up. And we made it to the semifinals of the Nichols Screenwriting Fellowship, and I was like 22 years old. And I remember like making it that far to like 150, script 150, out of like 10,000 submissions. And we started getting like cold phone calls from agencies and Gersh and agents and people that really liked the script and were like, hey, I want to rep you. And my co-writer at the time wanted to direct the movie. We ended up not signing with Gersh. And I have to say, like, in the scheme of life, it probably worked out for the best, because maybe I wouldn't have written Eternals, in that same series. A lot of things had to go exactly right to find yourself in this position. And so for sure, that was a moment, though, when I got that phone call and I'm like, oh my God, I'm 22. I'm literally still shooting weddings for a living. But this agent from Hollywood is calling me and saying, like, I loved your script. Like, what's up with that? Like, how do we work together? And that was really a moment. It was a light bulb, where I'm like, oh, I'm good at this. And I know how to do this. And it's not just like me struggling in the dark, and I think so that's what screenplay competitions and festivals are great for. They really can give you that external validation, which never underestimate the power of external validation. I mean, like someone telling you, hey, like you're really talented. You're like, oh, thank you. I'm gonna like wear that. I'm gonna lock it for the rest of my life. Like those things matter. Like give compliments to each other, lift up each other. And that's what I would also say is there's room at the top for everyone. I think there's this fallacy that like it's a dog eat dog, like cutthroat getting to the top of Hollywood. I found not only it to be the opposite, but I always embrace the opposite. I am always trying to lift up other writers and create community because you are stronger together. You know, writers have a tremendous amount of power. You're the ones who generate everything. And most importantly, when you go out and you have a great idea for a script and another writer's reading your script and you're helping them and you both succeed, it makes you both more powerful. It makes you both succeed more. And I think it's also just more fun. You know, it's way more fun to go on the ride with somebody else. So that would be my advice is definitely, you know, they do matter. Those awards things, they help in so many different ways and you never know how they're going to help. But yeah, the most important thing is to write something good. And even your family, you know, might be great feedback to read it and go, this is pretty good. Like you should submit this. And also just to remember, it's never good the first time. And a great script takes, I don't know, 7, 9, 20, or 2 drafts, but it's never going to be like perfect at first pass, you know? So do a couple passes and then submit it. You might change your life.
I think that's great advice. And especially having other people read it and then, going down the line of so many different drafts. So we've talked about writing feature films, you both writing feature films and short films when you were younger, but have you written other forms of media like TV or plays or dabbled in that at all?
Yeah, I really wrote short stories before I wrote any scripted material. Like when I was a teenager, I started just writing short stories. And then I think I was like, when I was about like 19 is when I wrote my first feature-length script. And that was maybe after probably only writing like 3 or 4 shorts. I just decided to just kind of like dive right in. That's been my approach with many things in my life. And then after that, I just kind of really started to fall in love with writing. And when I was in my early 20s, I actually wrote like a novel that I never did anything with it. It's just in a drawer. But I wrote a novel, and that was like it was like one of the most creatively satisfying periods of my life. I remember being really fixated on like word count, at the time, and just being like, it'd start out at being like, let's see if I can write 500 words a day. And then eventually it kind of kept working up and I was writing like 4,000 words a day, and I was just like plowing through this thing. And I was really just doing nothing else besides just living in this kind of novel world for about like 3 to 6 months. So yeah, I mean, I am personally very interested in other forms of writing, and at some point would love to kind of go back to that and start and write some short stories again, maybe write a novel one day. But for now, I'm very satisfied just working in screenwriting / television.
And were those sci-fi too?
Sci-fi? No, very far from it. Like I have a very much kind of like an Alexander Payne kind of sensibility, where I'm really into like these like tragic comedies that are about sort of like characters who are just basically like lovable losers, or who are the victims of circumstance in many ways, and like Coen Brothers type stuff. Like I'm a huge Coen Brothers fan. So the novel was very much in that vein, and it was just kind of like, it was like a tragic comedy basically. So, and it really, it had no genre elements in it at all.
It is cool. Your comedy comes through in Eternals. I love there's jokes sprinkled all throughout and tragedy.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's, important to have both, to give the audience the full experience. That's what they're there for. They want to go on a ride, and you got to put all the like loops and corkscrews in the roller coaster to make it be a full experience.
And that it is.
Yeah. I never wrote, novels, but for me, I think that filmmaking is what I kind of call it cultural sculpture. You're like sculpting with sound and people's memories and recollections of a thing and experiences and feelings. Movies take things that are hard to understand and they make them easy to feel. And I feel like that has always been something that I've been attracted to. I wrote, dozens of short films, which is a really fun way to practice because I went to film school. And I've also written, I don't know, 4 movies that have never been made and probably will never see the light of day. And that's a great way, again, failing upwards, failing often. And yeah, for me, writing is in so many ways it's a form of expression, and I think Ryan will tell you too, like we're both photographers, we're filmmakers, we write songs, we like poetry, and I don't do these things professionally. I do them because I like them and because they give me pleasure. And I think that all those things you can't just do grind forever in this one medium, in this one mode, because not only does it get stale, it doesn't feed you. So yeah, for me, a lot of my writing came from reading. I would read novels like nonstop, and that was just such a great way to learn the craft without you even realizing it. You're sitting there and you're just absorbing like the language, and I think language is really where it comes down to. I just have a love for that. And I would even say talking, is a form of writing, the way you spin a tale and keep people interested, and the way you structure pauses. And so all those things find their way into screenplays and into the writing. But yeah, I think that there's no right way to begin. I think there's a lot of amazing actors who have never written a thing in their life, and then they write an amazing movie and it wins every award and changes the world, the same way that there are editors who write stories. And there's so many ways you can get into telling a great story, but it all really comes down to that. Telling a story is a skill that will never not be useful, whether you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, a filmmaker, or just a citizen of the world. It's a really useful skill, and that's what you want to hone, not necessarily formatting and getting your character spaced at the right center on the page. That stuff is secondary. It's definitely secondary to storytelling.
So we have a few minutes left, but before our last question, I have a personal interest in knowing more about your stoner comedy, The Aliens Are Stealing Our Weed.
Yes.
Can we hear something about that?
Yeah, so that was actually a script that I wrote just kind of on the side, actually, while we were writing Eternals. Like that's when I started it. And I love the experience writing Eternals. And it was fantastic. But at the same time, you're writing for a big machine. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and so I just kind of wanted to do something that was a little bit about like blowing off steam and just kind of like doing my own version of a save the world movie. Throughout my life, I've always tried to basically combine my passions in my art projects. And so I just kind of look at what I'm interested in at the time and then see how I can turn that into something that I can, do professionally. And so I've always been interested in aliens. I'm very fascinated by the idea that there's other life out there and that they might have an interest in us in some shape or form. And then I've also been very passionate about weed. I've grown up in Northern California, and now that weed is legal, I can say this and not be locked up. So I had this idea of like, what if aliens came to this planet to basically steal our weed, and that's why they came here. And then so it's just about spinning a story from that. And I think like, so where it kind of nets out is basically I don't know if I'll just talk more about the project instead of the story. But it was also like, so it was a script that I wrote after Eternals, and then like one of our last meetings actually that we had before the pandemic was a lunch with Gina Rodriguez, and so we were having this really great lunch with Gina, and I hadn't really done anything with aliens up to that point. It was just sort of hanging out on my hard drive. And then as we were talking, we were getting along really well. And I was just like, oh my God, she would be like perfect for Candace, for the lead, basically in this stoner comedy. So, and I knew that she had kind of done like some of that stuff in some of her other movies a little bit. So I just kind of floated it out to her of like, hey, I have this project. And then she asked to read it. And just after she read it for the first time, she was just like, I'm in, like, let's do it. And so she's been just an incredible partner. Her and her producing partner, Molly, they basically just are the ones who kind of helped make this all happen. And so Gina's been attached. And so then we ended up selling that script to Paramount a few months into the pandemic, actually. We released it on 4/20 of 2020. And Paramount was the home that we thought was the best for it. And so, yeah, that project's over there just cooking. I'm actually about to do another rewrite on that to try to get that going early next year.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing it.
Great. I'm really happy to hear that.
So we're pretty much out of time. Just really fast, if you want to. One last question: what's your favorite movie or TV show of all time?
It's a hard answer, but the stock answer that I always give is Boogie Nights. I really love movies and stories that are about kind of like circus families, just people who kind of come together from odd walks of life and find a bond together. And then also that movie is just a really influential movie for me at the time that I was watching it. And I think that I've probably listened to the director's commentary on that movie more times than I've actually even watched the movie itself. And I just was endlessly fascinated by listening to Paul Thomas Anderson discuss filmmaking. And I feel like I learned so much through that commentary that it's always just held this really special place in my heart. And just by coincidence, or by a little anecdote, Dylan Tischner, the wonderful Dylan Tischner, who edited Boogie Nights, is actually one of the editors, along with Craig Wood, on Eternals. So I got to meet him through this movie, and it was really exciting. And I got to basically pick his brain about Boogie Nights a little bit, and that was kind of just a really fun circular experience. Punchline.
Yeah, we'll call that one back. Yeah, it's a funny question, because I think it's very telling about you as a person, but at the same time, for some people, it's just like, I just saw this movie when I was a kid and I loved it. For me, one of my favorite films of all time is City of God by Fernando Meirelles and Katja Lund. It is really a transportive work of cinema, and it's also to me, it's the definition of cinema because it's a film that can never be recreated. It's like a once in a lifetime, flash in a pan, like combination of a time and a place and people in a community. And it's an incredibly transportive film that takes you somewhere that most people have never been and will probably never go. But it's also a really universal tale about crime and evil and why people turn to crime and how we get there. If you haven't seen it, must watch. I think nominated for 5 Academy Awards, but beyond that, it's just like, it's a movie that even everyone who made it was like, if we had known how hard it was going to be and how dangerous it was going to be, we would have never made this film. And I think just that's what cinema is. Screenplays are incredible, and we all work in that industry. We spend our days imagining things on paper, but it's never forget that they're just blueprints for a movie. And the movie experience, the cinematic experience where you take words and then you put actors and cast and crew and you find these places in the real world, imposes its reality on your ideas. That's when movies are really made, then they're forged in that. So, it's a really special film, and it was life-changing for me because after I saw it, I was like, there's a whole universe out there where people have complex wants, needs, and desires, and they don't live anything like me or live a life that's anything like mine. And it was a moment when the world really opened up, and I realized that we all can be a part of it, and you don't need permission to jump in.
Great. Now we have a good movie list with Boogie Nights, City of Gods, and Eternals. And the aliens are stealing our weed.
Kaz and Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your insightful conversations.
We appreciate you guys. This was a lot of fun. And, thank God that these are out there. These didn't exist when I was in film school, and I feel like I would have been obsessively listening to, Deadline Junkies every single day if I'd known.
Subscribe for more episodes and check out Sketches written and performed by Deadline Junkies. Watch it at skedjes.com. Thanks for listening to the Deadline Junkies podcast.
Hey, this holiday season, check out Christmas Staycation, a Christmas comedy that we made on Zoom last year that I wrote and directed, and has dozens of Deadline Junkies involved. Kerstin is a supporting character, and Rand also makes a cameo. Buy the DVD at Barnes & Nobles, Best Buy, and Walmart. You can also stream Christmas Staycation on Vimeo, Hoopla, and FlixFlame. More info at xmasstaycation.com and follow us on Twitter at xmasstaycation.